But sometimes that inner child doesn't want to let go, because sometimes just being locked to the memory, just being locked to the behavior pattern helps us hold on to that person a little bit more.
And why do we want to do that?
Because let's say if you were to let go of the idea that you weren't good enough and you just said, no, I am good enough now, then part of you feels like you have to let go of your father. What if I forget about him? What if I'm not thinking about him every day? What if I don't keep him in mind?
Oh, hey,
What's up,
everybody.
guys? It's Jesse.
You throwing Luke's clicking, you throwing curveballs already. I love
Sorry, I
it.
just wanted to fuck with you.
No, that's start to a conversation I've had. So I'm here with not Jesse. I'm here with Elise Micheals. I'm Jesse. Elise, thank you. Elise, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. I'm glad I got your name right when I introduced myself as you.
Jesse James, in case you were wondering, that's the middle name. Elise.
Is that really your middle name?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Jesse James.
We have some good stuff to go off of now.
I hope my brother's not listening, because he normally doesn't and wouldn't, but he was the firstborn, and he got Lester Julius Carajet the third. And I dodged that one, and I came out, and my father and mother got to actually riff a little bit, and they said, hey, Jesse James, that's cool. Let's go with that. So I think I did well there.
Lester Julius. That is the most amazing name I've ever heard in my life. And then you came out Jesse.
Jesse.
Wow. They were
Lester.
like, you know what? This one, let's go off the cuff. And then this one, let's make it a brand, you know?
You know, it's funny about that too, and maybe we'll get into this in a little bit, because we're going to talk a lot about me, apparently, and you're going to kind of help me understand myself better. But Jesse James, famous American outlaw. I went through a period of my life, teenage years, early 20s. We'll say lots of interactions with law enforcement. So there's some consistency and prophecy with my name, if you will. But Elise, normally I take some time to get to know guests on the show and kind of unpack the who's and the what's and the whys. But with you, I'm going to be very selfish. With your background as a very successful, if you will, mental health and mindset coach exclusively for men, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and kind of let you do your thing and just kind of talk through what you do, but also maybe do a little bit of a deep dive on me for the benefit of myself selfishly, but also for the listener, so they can kind of understand some of these really important concepts that you help men with, like subconscious trauma, healing from that trauma. I've read that you try to coach men on how to be stoic despite chaotic surroundings, something that I'm sure anyone would aspire to. But if I could really quick, just one question, being a men's coach and a successful one at that, how did you become one? Why did you become one? What are you passionate about when it comes to helping men with some of these really important issues?
Well, when I first started my business, it was just right before the pandemic started. And I was actually trying to be a woman's coach. So I was posting motivational content on LinkedIn, not specific to any gender, but in my mind, I was thinking, okay, I'll help women be like a spiritual coach. And only men reached out to me for help. And I was like, this is super weird. I don't know how to help you. In my mind, that's what I was thinking, right? But then I said, well, Lisa, you're trying to help people through pain. And so why don't you just try it? And then once I did, I realized like how little support men actually had. And even though I was like, I don't know how people will judge me or if they'll accept a female as a men's coach, I just said, you know what, I'll open the doors and I'll be that support system for them, because I think women have enough. It's been the best decision I ever made. That was over 4 years ago. And now I'm super passionate, obviously, because I can understand the minds of men and the motivations and see a world that I just was super ignorant to before.
So about 4 years or so, give or take, has anything surprised you from outside looking in and realizing like, hey, this might be an area where I can really serve people, to now 4 years later? What's maybe one or two big surprises you've had in that journey?
I mean, there's been so many surprises, but I think really like the ignorance that we all have towards men is like we just don't think of them, because immediately I said, okay, I'll be a woman's coach. And you think about men's coaches, but when you think about a men's coach, you think sports coach or business coach or, weightlifting coach. You don't think like a mental health coach. You don't think that men need support in that area, because we're so well trained in society to ignore men's emotional needs that it was shocking to me when they came to me for help. I didn't know that men needed help. I mean, that was just like the biggest surprise, is like just knowing that I didn't even think about men and most people don't.
Yeah, maybe we assume competence and independence and that they don't need help at all, you know. And I know a lot of that's wrapped
100%.
up in culture and, you know, gender identity and roles and things like that. Just as you interact with I'm assuming like dozens, hundreds of men that you coach, any themes that are just prevailing across the board?
A lot of men struggle in relationships. Just they're usually pretty good at knowing what they want to do for business or knowing how they want to succeed. But in relationships, they feel a lack of connection, a lack of understanding, a lack of appreciation. And yet they don't know how to ask for their needs. They don't know how to ask to be appreciated. They don't know how to ask to be loved. They don't even have their own definition of what love is. So there's just a lot of arrested development that I see with men where they haven't developed certain skill sets and they're kind of stuck in a behind phase that women are super far ahead in. I don't think because men and women brain develop like super differently, or like, we do have different skill sets, but it's also societal saying pushing women to do one thing and pushing men to do another. We're just not encouraging each other to learn specific things that would help relationships.
Yeah, you know, you just made me think about. So we had a guest very recently, and we talked about habits, which is a big old broad term that can mean a lot of things. But I think relevant to this, one of the specific things we talked about was the habits that happen way deep down, hidden. They're more insidious, but how we respond to relationships. Habits around like, are we defensive, and why? You know, why do we develop to be defensive? But what we really talked about is, you know, it's easy to focus on habits that are like, okay, tangible, right? I want to have less coffee. I told you before we jumped on, I'm on 4 this morning. It's 10 o'clock. But the ones that are harder are, how do we rewire the habits around how we do relationships with people? How do we respond to people, you know, so that we don't perceive threats and things like that? I'm assuming a lot of the work that you do is helping men recognize those more like hardwired internal habits, and then doing the hard, consistent work to overcome them over time. Yeah.
That's exactly the process.
I'm going to start the little journey here to go deep on certain areas. All right. And I mentioned previous guests, and there's been this one word that keeps coming up in my own evolution. I've been learning a lot about it since starting this podcast, but it's called trauma. And you, Elise, talk a lot about subconscious trauma. Unpack that a little bit. What is some subconscious trauma?
Everybody has subconscious trauma because it's there's trauma that we know we have and there's trauma that we don't know we have, because 95% of our daily operation is subconscious. It's on autopilot, right? And so if 95% of our daily operation is subconscious, there are 95% of things that we're not seeing that are going on. So 95% of the way that your ship is being steered on the daily, you're not aware of. So people understand that they've endured trauma if they've maybe gone through a big T, which is something like physical abuse or car accident or war. Like, that those things can be very traumatic. But the definition of trauma is not the event itself, but the psychological impact of an event. So, what might be traumatic for us as an adult, or what we're logically thinking is trauma, is not the same as it is for us as a 5-year-old child. So, whatever is wired into us as children for whatever environment that we had becomes stored in our subconscious and can become subconscious trauma, dictating our behaviors and our beliefs from that point moving forward.
Well said. So Benoit Kim, and I know you've been on Benoit's show. He defined on this podcast, and I wouldn't say defined. He talked about trauma in this way, and I thought it was really interesting. I'd love to hear a response to it. But he described trauma as an abrupt, unexpected breaking of a pattern, of which that pattern implies safety. What do you think about that? The connection between a pattern, which is comfortable, and then an unexpected breaking of a pattern as it relates to trauma.
I mean, Benoit, he's really good at what he does, and everybody explains things differently. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. The body, in order to not have trauma, needs to be safe in the body and in the mind. So it's a disruption of whatever pattern you feel like is needed for your safety. If there's consistent non safety thrown in there, it becomes traumatic for the body.
How do I know if I have or I'm working through or living with subconscious trauma?
Well, I always tell people just assume that you are, because, like we said, 95% of whatever's going on is subconscious. But your real question is, how do I know what part is the trauma, and how do I work through that? So always start with what's going on in your life that you don't like or that you want to improve or that you feel stuck on, that you just feel like no matter what you do, you can't get past it. So do you have any examples like that going on in your life
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah, so something I can't get past no matter what would be whatever externally happens in my life that could potentially validate or affirm me. Could be career advancements before I stepped out of the corporate world. It could be feedback from my spouse that I'm a good father. It could be feedback from friends or family, like, anything. Jesse, you're a good guy. I just wanted you to know. Despite any of that, if you give me one conflict or one piece of criticism or one issue, all of that positive out the window, and I live and stay with the negative. And that's how I view myself. But I don't know what it would take for me to actually just wake up and say, you're good. So that would be something I'm stuck on, to answer your question.
Already from that one sentence that you've told me, I can tell that there's deep self esteem and people pleasing tendencies. If all of your worth is dependent upon the external validation and approval of others, it tells me that something happened somewhere where there was consistent disapproval of how you were, and you feel the need to earn attention and love. So, if you can tell me, and sometimes this isn't with parents, sometimes it's with an uncle or a grandfather.
Stay with
Sometimes it's
parents.
not even
Stay with parents.
okay. Okay. I'm just opening it up for people,
Yeah, I know. I love it.
if they want to understand this. And since I can see a response from you, I'm guessing that this is is this resonating with you?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I'm to be frank, I'm super impressed that you landed there. So self-esteem is an interesting one because in my opinion, now this is just me just riffing. Like, if you ask me, Jesse, how do you feel about your qualities or yourself, your abilities, things like that? Like, I feel fairly good and confident. It's more of this other word, and we can unpack and talk about. But it's like worth, like self-worth. And in my history, I joked about it earlier with Jesse James and having a lot of trouble growing up. But I feel like there's more of a redemptive desire where I can't get past things that I've done with my own free will and agency. But back to your question there. So my father, who's not with us anymore, he passed away when I was 19 from AIDS, actually. He was how I would describe, and I didn't realize this at the time, but he was a hyper critical, micromanaging father in terms of the feedback that he would give me. I mean, my parents were divorced, so I used to spend all weekends with him, and we'd have these like 40-minute rides back and forth. And they were basically downloads where he would just tell me the right way to live, the things I was doing wrong, and all those. And it would go on basically for my entire childhood, where he was just so fixated on his own kind of moral compass. And I feel as though I had this like unintentional therapist for probably most of my life growing up. So yeah, my father would play a role there.
Okay. And when did you start acting out?
In fifth grade, I stuck a paper clip in an outlet and short circuited the whole school, if that's what you mean. But the real acting out, eighth grade. Yeah,
Okay. And when did your parents get divorced?
6 years old.
So in fifth grade, you stuck a paperclip in an outlet, precedes the divorce. Divorces don't just happen in an instant. I'm guessing that there was not a good home environment at the time.
There was conflict between the sets of parents, kind of in wrestling with how it happened, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Can you tell me about like your relationship as a whole with your parents? Do you feel like did they attend a lot of your school events? Did they kind of like pay attention to your grades and stuff, or was it kind of like you were a trusted kid who, you could kind of do whatever you wanted and there weren't like a ton of eyes on you?
I was gonna go with the latter, being like a little bit more independent on my own, but I don't know that I was trusted. But more or less, it felt to me, if I try to remember what it feel like growing up, that like there wasn't a lot of attention on like the school, the grades, those types of things. But it feels like I was just kind of doing my own thing, kind of like out there on my own. Very introverted and inward, especially when I was like playing and things like that. But yeah, I don't have a lot of memories of people really making sure I was being responsible and doing the things I was supposed to do, even as a younger kid.
Which makes sense why you would start then to act out because it sounds like the only time that you really got a lot of attention paid to you was when you did start to act out because even though you didn't really like the downloads that your dad was giving you because he was kind of being a therapist, I'm sure he probably paid more attention to you and gave you more time when you needed a reprimand, when you needed a listening to, when you needed a talking to. This is where the subconscious part. Of course, you've never thought about it like that because we're not thinking, oh, I want my parents' attention. This is just like, when they talk about people hurting themselves, oh, they just want attention. It's not like the person is saying, I want attention. And so children, they need their parents' love in order to survive. So they will do anything to get that survival, to get that love. And, when we're left to our own devices, we either go one way or another. We either resort to extreme people pleasing tendencies where we just do everything for everyone in order to be like the good boy or the good girl, or we act out because we don't care. And even if we're getting punished, at least they're still seeing us. At least they're still saying something to us. At least we're still in the radar. And then that tells our childhood brain, okay, they know I'm still here. So I'm
Yeah.
still okay.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And I think part of it, probably maybe unique to me though, is those downloads also included stories that my father used to tell me, inappropriate stories for my age. And all of his stories, like the themes were conflict, violence that he had committed, fights he'd been in, people he'd beat up, like all these like really extreme stories that he would tell me because frankly he was a pretty extreme guy. And so I think some of it also internally, if you were to ask me, Jesse, like who are you really like as a kid? Sensitive. I care about people and I want to care about people. I wouldn't necessarily be someone who just responds to aggression with aggression. But I thought what was really complicated was my father taught and modeled that that's what you do. I mean, I can tell you stories about being on the road with him in the car and somebody driving aggressively and how quick and confident and bold he was to just jump right into that situation. And I think there was always this part of me that goes, well, that's not who I am at the core. But then, and here's the tricky part, that's who I wanted to be. So I spent a lot of my life, as most kids are, exposed to scenarios where you need to choose how you want to respond, right? So if it's a bully or something like that, and I was always torn between who I thought I was and who my father told me I should be. And that's why I found myself moving towards, fights. And as I grew up, especially in, teenage college years, I was getting in fights all the time because I felt as though if I didn't, I was in some way weak, and it took me years to even talk about it the way that I'm talking about it right now. But it's, the impact our parents have clearly in this 10, 20 minutes is pretty strong.
So you feeling like you would be weak is, it's that inner child's longing to be approved of and loved by our parents. So of course you wanted to be like dad because dad was hero, right? It doesn't matter like what we think about them now, it matters what we thought about them then. And even if it felt inappropriate, even if it felt a little off, we still desire to gain that approval. So of course you're getting in these fights because you think that, you're kind of living up to the stories that dad would tell
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And so let's just sit there for a second. So I'm realizing now genuinely and authentically that still there are some pleasing of my father, probably subconsciously in me that you're bringing to consciousness. How do we break as adults, right? Like how do we do the work? And I realize it's a big question, but what's part of the process of breaking free from some of those paradigms that could be super deep inside of us?
Right. Well, we're working through it right now. If you would be so patient
Yes.
to finish the process. Everybody always asks this question when we get right in the thick of the muck, right? You're like, I don't want to experience the realization. I just want the answer, but you can't have the answer without the realization.
Yeah. And you're
So
drawing out.
next
Let's keep
next
going.
question from me.
Yep. Let's go.
Well, first, are you ready to do the work?
Yeah. Always. Yeah.
Okay.
The answer to that is, are you ready to lead a meaningful life and be the best person you can be? So of course, yes.
So there are some things right now that are coming up that we don't know are 100% drawing from just this one moment of being in the car with dad, right? There's tons of little factors that build into it, but these could be key themes. And like you just said, you're really realizing right now that there are still some aspects of the inner child that are trying to please dad. And it's that part of you that continues to search for the external approval because dad's not here anymore. But somehow we feel like if we get that external approval, it's kind of like a sideways attempt at, aren't you proud of me? And did your dad ever say that he was proud of you or he approved of you or anything like that?
Not proud because unfortunately the last 6 years of knowing him before he passed is when I was acting out the most, getting in trouble and things like that. He told me every time he saw me every day, incessantly, that he loved me, for sure. Proud of me? No. And as a matter of fact, one of the last times that I spent with him, he died of, I said AIDS, but there's this category of cancers called AIDS related cancer. So technically what took him was a brain cancer. But the last interaction I had with him when he still had his wits about him, he was picking me up from college my freshman year after a hearing in which I got in a fight and I got kicked off of campus. So my last conversation with my father that he was conscious and really like paying attention was I felt ashamed. So proud, no, loved, very much so.
So we have with us this lasting feeling of shame.
Yeah.
And it's the shame that continues to carry throughout our lives as nothing's ever good enough. Because you just said that you're trying, like what you said at the beginning was you're trying to make up for all of the acting out that you did. Because if I just do enough good now, it'll make up for how I feel ashamed about what my father thought about me before he died.
You know, when you talk about people pleasing, when you said that, 5 or 10 minutes ago, I just wanna touch on this for a second. My reaction was, "No, not me. You kidding me? Like, I don't care." Like, and this is tricky, and there's a question in here. Can people pleasing be isolated to particular relationships as opposed to a more general, broad characteristic? Because if you just by example, if you brought my wife in here right now and said, I think Jesse's a people pleaser, what say you? She would say, are you kidding me? He's a maverick. He doesn't care about validation. But when you talk about my father, if you're looking at me and saying like you care about what your father thinks, I will tell you absolutely. And it's been 20 years. And I mean, I'm being very vulnerable. I want to please him. I still think about every day whether I am. But I would say I don't know if I care about what other people think. And can you kind of isolate it to certain relationships or is it usually more broad?
Yes, you can. And I want you to get out of the podcaster mindset for a second because I want you to feel what you're feeling in relation to the conversation that we're having.
You're gonna bring me back in. Okay. I will stay there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stay there for just a second because we're so close to you
Yeah.
having a breakthrough on this. When it comes to people pleasing, we're not just talking about, oh, I do everything for everyone and I want to please everyone. People pleasing can also be a thing of like we subconsciously do things in order to earn the approval that we are seeking. It's almost like a little bit of a manipulation. Like the ego wants to make others feel good so that we can feel good. You're doing it in terms of like neglecting some of maybe your own needs. Like you're denying yourself the ability to feel good about yourself because you're trying to please your father. You're denying yourself the ability to feel good about yourself because you're trying to please your father because you are so filled with shame. Internal self shame says, I am bad. The core of me is bad, or the core of me is not good. So I need to make up for it every day. What I'm seeing here is child Jesse trying to please his father, and adult Jesse being very logical and saying, like, I do my own things. I do the best I can every day. I have a beautiful family. You have the logical approval of yourself as a man, but your inner child is still trying to earn that. And somewhere in between, we need to let ourselves off the hook.
You have the logical approval of yourself, but the inner child is still trying to gain approval. That's powerful. That's powerful. I've never thought about it in that framework where I can just, for example, I could write down the things that are good about me or the things that I've done, right? That's your rational brain working. But then when I'm not consciously thinking about it, where do I default to? And I will concede, agree, all of the things, affirm that is still something that I'm struggling with. I think is that internal kind of feeling of worth for sure.
So now the next step is we have to figure out what we want to do about it, right? If we're sitting in this place where we see that there are two sides, my inner child and my adult self, this is what we get so caught up in. We're like, but I know I feel good about myself every day, or I know the right diet to do, or I know that I should leave this relationship. Why can't I do it? Because we haven't acknowledged that there's another part of us that is getting a sense of fulfillment from not letting go. And part of the inner child like there's different aspects. So you can choose what resonates with you, right? We have to acknowledge that there is an inner child in all of us that because it's just like it's just the earliest part of ourselves that retained memory and behavioral patterns and whatever. Doesn't have to be hippy dippy. But when you have this inner child who's stuck in the place where they want to gain their father's approval and is locked in time because dad passed away at 19, when I was still in my mess, when I was still trying to figure things out. And now I'm desperately trying to make up for that, and I never can because dad passed away. We have to, as our adult selves, go to that inner child in a quiet space and time and talk to ourselves and let them know that it's okay. Like you have to tell yourself what you need to hear in order to set yourself free. But sometimes that inner child doesn't want to let go because sometimes just being locked to the memory, just being locked to the behavior pattern helps us hold on to that person a little bit more.
And why do we want to do that?
Because let's say if you were to let go of the idea that you weren't good enough and you just said, no, I am good enough now, then part of you feels like you have to let go of your father. What if I forget about him? What if I'm not thinking about him every day? What if I don't keep him in mind? So a little part of us feels like as long as we're not good enough, we can still keep that connection with our dad.
We're touching on, I'm just thinking like forgiving, like I feel like I would need to somewhere forgiveness, self-forgiveness is part of a process to break free from that past so I can, I'm assuming, be free going forward. And I'll just say anecdotally, something that I'm experiencing for the first time in my life is having children that are growing older. And my oldest child right now is right around the age that I was when my parents got divorced. And I can't help but look at her sometimes, especially when my brain is free and my heart is free and I can just focus. I can't help but look at her sometimes and actually allow myself to feel some grace and forgiveness, because I think to myself, she's so innocent, she's so precious, she could do nothing wrong. And that is not a way that I would ever describe myself. But being a father is starting to help me see that little child that you're talking about. And I don't, if I'm not intentional going forward, I don't know that those thoughts will fully form, but I'm starting to see myself as more of a, you understand what I'm trying to say? Like I'm starting to see like, oh, wait a minute. Some of my choices weren't my choices.
Right. I mean, we only know what we know. And as adults, we get so angry at what we've done in the past, not understanding that there are a lot of things that we just don't know. What could you have done as a fifth grader? What could you have possibly done as a sixth grader or seventh or eighth or ninth? You can be a menace to your parents, but you're just a developing child. If you don't have an environment that is safe and secure and stable, you're just trying to survive in the best way that you know how as a child. If we're not given the best terms, how can we be blamed for that?
Yeah. But can you see how, so the way that you're talking, which is coming from a place of truth and wisdom and experience, but the way that you're talking is giving grace for a kid that it acts out and has those issues. Whereas what you're hearing from me, and I'm sure you run into this a lot, it's no, there's something in the core, that fifth grader that you mentioned, the one that stuck the paperclip in the outlet. My whole life, I've thought to myself, there's something wrong with me. That's why I did that. Every single thing. And almost where it gets murky and tricky is I'm talking about owning my mistakes, because there were mistakes that I made in my 20s as well. And shoot, 30s, right? Where I'm almost like, no, I own all of them, even if it makes me feel bad. So part of the, maybe it's a wall that's also subconscious, but when I start doing the work, like having this conversation, whenever I feel myself like giving grace to myself, I'm like, no, 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 no. That's all you, buddy. Own it. Like move on and let's figure this out. And I know that's not healthy, but I'm just responding to myself, even allowing myself in this moment to give myself a pass.
Well, there's a difference between giving grace to yourself and taking responsibility and then just placing all of the blame and all of the shame on yourself so that you can never escape it. Because a 5-year-old's reactions and a fifth grader's reactions are completely different than a 28-year-old. So, are you going to really hold the same accountability and responsibility on a fifth grader that you would hold on yourself right now?
No, no.
That doesn't make any sense. So, why are you doing that to yourself?
Yeah. So rationally now, as I'm talking it through with you, I'm not. But back to the subconscious stuff, I think that's just the state that I live in. It's that,
Well, that's the state that you're choosing to live in because right now you're telling me, oh, it's in the subconscious. No, if you're consciously being able to talk about it right now,
yeah.
then you're already aware of it. So some part of you is consciously choosing, like you just said, oh no, buddy, that's all you. So some part of you is actually afraid to give yourself a little bit of leeway because of why. You would have to tell me what bad things are going to happen if you give yourself some grace. I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
I'm not having integrity and owning my mistakes. That in itself feels like I'm blaming someone else for my problems.
Does integrity mean continuous self punishment?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Where you find me today. Yeah.
So then let me ask you another question. Does anyone actually learn from continuous punishment? What is the point of teaching if there's never actually space for the teaching to prove its worth? Because when you're just punishing yourself and not giving yourself grace to say, have I learned this lesson? Then you never learn a lesson because you just say, nope, punishment is all you get.
Yeah, you never grow, which is unhealthy.
So, what are you going to do moving forward to expand your level of grace that you have for yourself, for that inner child? Because it's not just for you at the age that you're at right now, it's for that fifth grader you, it's for that sixth grader you, it's for that 19-year-old you who just did, like, you're still owning it. Yes, I made those mistakes, but the way that I choose to act today is not the same. That is the proof of you having learned the lesson, having taken responsibility. Someone who doesn't take responsibility continues doing the mistakes.
I don't think responsibility, and I'll get to your question, what am I gonna do about it? And I'm assuming you would help with something like that, but, I don't think taking responsibility, is an issue of mine. I think it's actually a weakness in that I do it, for in everything that I do, right? And that comes to the whole pride thing, and but, what do I do? Like, how do I incorporate what we're skimming the surface of here? I think intentionality is a huge part of it. Like, I can't just have a conversation like this and go on with my life. I have to take this where, and I'm assuming go deeper and deeper and deeper. But as far as actionable steps to break free from that subconscious, I have no idea.
So if your daughter were to stick a paper clip in an outlet at school and shut the whole school down right now, how would you treat her? How would you treat her? How would you respond?
I would respond with concern, love, and patience. First off, I would relate with it. I understand that she doesn't know why she did that because I don't know why I did that. So it wouldn't be punitive. Of course, there is like a logical connection between actions and consequences where parents always have to skirt that kind of dilemma and that tension. But my response would be, "Oh my God, what's wrong with my child? How do I help her?"
Would you hold that against her every single year moving forward? What if she held it against herself? And every other day she was like, "Oh, Dad's gonna punish me because I put the paper clip in the outlet," even though you never showed her that.
It would break my heart. I wouldn't want her to live like that.
Okay, what would you tell her? How would you help her then? How would you help her break out of that?
I would remind her constantly that she's perfect just the way she is, and that I'm here to help her however I can.
Okay, what if she says, "Daddy, but I can't get over the fact that I did something so stupid. I did something so stupid and everybody's mad at me and everybody hates me and what if I do this again and you and mom aren't going to love me?" And it's repetitive.
I'll use that word. I would repetitively remind her, tell her, desperately plead with her to understand that she's absolutely perfect the way that she is. We all make silly decisions sometimes. We don't have to know why. Your daddy was the same way, but we're going to be here to help you avoid those decisions going forward, no matter what. But my love is free and forever.
And that's what you need to tell your inner child because he didn't get that.
It's very my brain. The two parts of my brain are kind of like at war right now. Where rationally, I understand that that's what someone needed to say to me when I was her age. Yeah. And rationally, I understand it that me in that scenario didn't know why I was doing that. Couldn't possibly at that age understand the powerful external influences that could have been leading to that. Like I understand that with the rational part of my brain, but it would take time for me to default to that understanding as my new kind of sense of self. It would take a lot of time for me to get there. You're bringing me there especially when you bring in my daughter. And if you can't tell, I get very emotional when I talk about my kids, but it sounds like it would be a journey for me to have to live in that in perpetuity.
Right, but it was a journey for you to get here in the first place. And that's the whole point is like, we just talked about where we lived and you live in Colorado and you've seen snow, right? So you know that like let's say it's snowing a lot and there are two pathways. And one pathway you walk a lot, so you've already shoveled it out. And the other pathway has like 8 feet of snow. And you're like, dude, I'm not going down that path because I can't walk through it, right? I'm going down the path that I shoveled. But at the end of the one that you shoveled, now there's a dumpster fire. And this is how the neural pathways work in the brain. Every single habit, every single trait that we have creates a neural pathway. And so you have a path that you've carved out for a long time. And the brain says, this is a clear path that I'm going to take. And sometimes we don't take a different path until we get burned enough. But you consciously now know, you're like, okay, I've been walking this path for a long time. And this is always the result that I get. And maybe it's time to try something new. So I've just introduced to you a new path. And you're like, dude, this is a hard path for me to walk because it's got 8 feet of snow. And I'm like, here's a shovel. And you're like, dude, I don't want to shovel this. So that's why people give up. They give up because it's hard. It's hard to create a new neural pathway that then becomes the new path. But the more you choose to take that path, you consciously choose to take that path of grace and forgiveness and placing yourself in that fifth grader's shoes again and again and again and saying, I loved you and you're perfect and you didn't know what you were doing. I can forgive you. We have moved on. We have grown. We have done better. And you would be proud of me. I'm proud of you actually for exploring your fifth grader brain because you didn't know, right? You're shoveling and shoveling. And every time you're shoveling, you're making progress to make that the new normal. And the other pathway starts getting snowed in to where you look back in your life, you're like, wow, I can't believe I actually used to think those things about myself because now I take this path. That's exactly how we rewire every single habit in our lives. And everybody who's listening to this can think of something in their lives where they once did one thing and then one day they decided to do something different. And now that's their new lifestyle. And they're like, yeah, I can't believe I used to eat a bag of Doritos every day. And now I can't even eat Doritos because it makes me feel sick, right? Like people do that stuff all the time and they don't think about the work that it takes the brain to do this because maybe they haven't been doing it for as many years. But the more years you do something and the more you repeat it to yourself, the deeper that neural pathway goes. So that's why it's so important to catch yourself quickly and be very conscious and consciously choose. And every single time you choose something else, you are making progress.
Mm. And is that so staying on that kind of visual there, snow, right? Shoveled, not shoveled. Is that how neural pathways work? Where is if you keep putting in the effort to work on that shoveling and you don't walk down this path, will that path fill back up with snow so that it's not the path that we want to go down? And you're literally kind of like rewiring your brain that way?
Yes, you're definitely rewiring it. It's not like the other one fills up with snow as much, but you're not digging it any deeper. And so you're intentionally digging the other one deeper. And so that becomes the easier route for the brain to take, right? Like if you trained yourself to brush with your left hand instead of your right hand every day, your teeth, eventually it would just become normal for you to brush with your left hand. And then if you brush with your left hand more than your right hand, well, then that becomes the one that I just gravitate towards now. So it works just like that for anything.
How do I start shoveling?
Well, with the type of coaching that I do, I don't necessarily ascribe to you have to do all these daily rituals and routines. I think we've become kind of like mental masturbation where we're like, oh, I have to do my ice bath, then my sauna, then my journaling, then my inner child meditation, and then I'm doing my 30K run. And then like 4 hours of your day is gone just to the self care, and people are still running around lost, right? This is like really what we've gotten into, but that's like intellectually bypassing the work that you need to do. What we just did was actually like you already digging the pathway because you didn't even know it was there. And now you know it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? What we've just revealed to you, you don't just forget that. Now you know. So once you know something, you can make conscious choices to do something different. And the thing is, this isn't the only blocker in your life. But once you start making moves, one blocker after one blocker, it makes immense changes in your entire life, right? So it's not journaling that we need to do. We need to attack the blocker. And once we do that, it makes the changes. So this one memory, this one realigning of the pathway, if that could help you entirely eliminate that self-shame and eliminate any subconscious people-pleasing tendencies and eliminate that feeling of I'm not good enough, what will the elimination of the feeling I'm not good enough do for your whole life?
Oh my goodness. You're talking about feeling content for the I mean, that word. I know what it means intellectually. I have no idea what it feels like. And being content would settle my mind and settle my heart. Why is that important? Because then I can be present. Why is being present important? Because life is fleeting. And I feel as though, out of heart of gratitude and appreciation for my kids and my wife, that I'm missing moments with them that matter because my brain is so preoccupied and fixated on this kind of self pursuit of redemption of some kind, which is rooted in exactly what you're talking about. So it would be freeing and would probably just I could have used one word. Ready? Joy. It would bring joy to my life.
Perfect. So that is the thing that we would need to zero in on, right? And we don't get that just from doing surface level things like the journaling or whatever. Those things, and I'll just show you. Like I have a whiteboard over here where I wrote for my master class last week for the men that I have in my membership. The way that you rewire a habit and rewire some of the subconscious programming, and I'll just look at it. So the Better Man membership is feel better, do better, be better. That's kind of our thing. And so the first step is awareness and presence, the subconscious reprogramming, and the identity shift. So it's just like a 3-step process that you use, and you can utilize things like journaling or ice baths or any of that as ways to get there as tools. But essentially, yeah, you have to be the more you can become aware and present, then we do the subconscious reprogramming, and then we have the identity shift, because whether you like it or know it or not, a lot of your identity is now wrapped up in this thought, because you said it many times on the call. I always tell when somebody's identity is wrapped up in something, I'm just not there yet, or I've always been this way, or it would take a lot of work for me to get there. You've wrapped so much of your identity into the I'm not enough that it's created how you perceive your ability to learn, how you perceive what comes to you, how you perceive things. So there's a massive shift that also comes with behavior change. I know I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent different than what you asked, but all of these things go into play when we're looking to change a huge part of ourselves that we don't realize, and that's why we give up so easily. But first, okay, so I actually have a checklist and I can send you after on things that you can choose depending on the stress level that you're at.
Yeah.
But the first, awareness and presence. We have to bring awareness to the moment and awareness to our body, because our body holds trauma, and we need to get our body and our brain aligned with the moment. So like Benoit said, like a lot of literature says, with complete safety there is no trauma. So if you can think about this moment, right, you as a 5th grader, and however your body's responding to that, and completely relax every muscle in your body and allow yourself to feel completely safe when thinking about it, and reassure yourself with the words that you were telling me earlier, you can start to really deeply rewire that neural pathway, because your body is no longer responding as if that's a threat.
So the physical body can control even the emotional response and the mental kind of remembering of something. Yeah.
Yeah, the physical body does control the response, because you've already been thinking logically, right? I'm good enough, I'm worthy. But you haven't made a shift in how you feel. So if you want to shift how you feel, you have to shift how your body is feeling, right? Because your body is responding in ways that you're not paying attention to. Maybe you're hunched over, maybe your foot's tapping, maybe your hands are sweating, maybe your stomach is clenched. And for us to intentionally relax all of that and go,
Yeah. So before, and you probably don't know this about me, but I worked in corporate healthcare, objectively speaking, successful, right? Doing well. Abruptly left in June to do this very thing. That to say, before I left, and the reason I left is because burnout, probably workaholism, if that's a word. But my employer offered, it was beautiful. They offered 10 free online therapy sessions, and I have not pursued that. You could probably tell from this conversation, but I did meet 3 times with a therapist. And within those 3 meetings, she recommended a book for me based on what she heard from me and learned from me. And it is like bullseye to what you're talking about. It's called The Body
body
Keeps the
keeps the
Score.
score.
Yeah, you probably
Right.
knew I was going to say that 5 minutes ago, but I started I started reading that book. I admittedly I haven't finished it, but now I'm going to go pick it up because I got about 3 chapters in, and I remember reading it and just having revelations like, oh my god, like this is true. It's true to me, and it's true scientifically. You could tell that how much of your trauma is wrapped up in your body. So anyone out there, it sounds like Elise, you've read it. Yeah, would you
Yeah.
recommend that book? Okay,
Yeah.
Body Keeps the Score. 100% recommend it. But go ahead. I totally derailed you there.
That is really the essential of all healing, is if you can get your body in a safe state, you can pretty much reprogram anything. It really can just be that easy. I'm not a person who likes to overcomplicate things. I find that healing doesn't have to be a decade long. It can be, that's why my coaching program is so short. It can be a step-by-step process. And obviously, to expand something and get more in depth, you need longer time, because neural pathways aren't just created in a day, like we said. But the process for understanding your own trauma, for understanding your own subconscious, is very quick. It can be very quick.
Yeah. It felt like you were working through that process that you looked over too. So the first one was awareness. What was the first kind of process? It was
Awareness and presence.
awareness
Yeah.
and presence. What's the next part of that journey?
Subconscious reprogramming.
Say a little bit about that.
The subconscious reprogramming is exactly what me and you were doing when I was telling you to imagine your daughter and, what would you tell her? And that's what we need to tell. If I was working with a client, I would like force you to tell your fifth, we would get into a place where you would be in a calm state and really talking to yourself. That's the subconscious reprogramming, is sending yourself a different message than you've received before.
And that takes outward intentionality, action of some kind to do
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What's next?
And then the next one is identity shift. So no longer identifying with what we've always done, with what we've always been, and adopting a new identity. So, you keep bringing up like, yeah, I was this troubled kid. It's time to have a new identity with that. It's time to have a new shift with that. You weren't a troubled kid. You were a kid who was trying to figure it out. You were someone who was exploring. You made some mistakes. We're not going to completely deny and eradicate that some things could have been different, but we need to start creating an identity shift that, maybe it was okay for a 16-year-old to get into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, that one's tough. I feel like and clearly that process that you laid out there, I'm assuming it's linear, like one then the other, but also maybe jumping back and forth throughout that
It's a
process.
circle, because the identity shift helps create awareness and presence, right? Like they all bleed into each other. And I mean, you have to be willing, right? Because like I said earlier, part of you isn't willing to let go. And that's why you resist the change that you need so badly. When
Yeah.
you're ready, you'll be able to submit to the practice.
I want to be this is going to be, if you'll allow me, Elise, this is going to be a little bit of a pivot. You talked about the event that you just had last week. What was that called again, Elise?
Every week I have a membership meetup with my Better Men.
We do Better Men. Okay. There's something that I've heard you talk about once before leading up to this, and also I read it. Fight cycles with spouses, partners, what have you. When we reflect on the conversation we just had about myself, maybe my inner tendencies and things like that, it's so important. These are my words here, but it's so important for me to have a deep enough understanding and awareness of myself and be doing the work to break those habits so that I can have healthy relationships. And what relationship is more pivotal than your spouse, partner, what have you? Can you talk a little bit about how in fight cycles, because I haven't heard of that term before, but just talk a little bit about what a fight cycle is. And then if we could just spend maybe a little bit of time on how your work can impact those pivotal relationships.
Yeah. So fight cycles, I mean, everybody experiences a fight cycle, and it can come from different attachment styles. But when it's a fight cycle, it implies that it's happened more than once. And I see this a lot with men and women because they're simply not creating enough space to validate and understand each other. So one person's always bringing up a topic, and the other person's always either minimizing or ignoring the topic. And it makes the other person feel invalidated. And then they have to bring it up again. And then the other person's annoyed because they're bringing it up again. They're like, why? I thought we got over this. Or they approach a solution that doesn't work for the other person because the person now at this point doesn't even care about the problem they're bringing up. They care about the fact that their partner is not hearing them. And so it turns into this cycle of continuously being misunderstood, both parties, that really, creates this space between them where they just don't feel like they're on the same page anymore. And those can vary depending on, maybe someone is avoidant, maybe someone's anxious, or maybe someone's avoidant, dismissive. Like usually that's what happens. Hardly are any people secure. They won't get in a fight cycle if they're secure and secure.
Okay.
Let me know.
Sorry.
I know I'm going on a
No, no,
tangent
no,
here.
this is good. I actually I'm tracking 100. And I want you to keep going that direction. But before I do, you just threw out some labels there, and I'm sure like I'm sitting here like, wait a minute, am I avoidant? Am I am I stable? Clearly not. But like, what are some of those? It sounds like being stable is what to aspire to, but what are some of those other tendencies that I'm assuming contribute towards that tension?
Right. Well, there are 4 different attachment styles. There's secure, there's avoidant, there's anxious, and there's anxious avoidant. And they're more like a spectrum, not like a fast and hard one or the other. I mean, well, if you're usually avoidant or usually anxious, just means you're showing a lot more tendencies towards that. So I don't want you to automatically be like, oh, well, I'm not stable. Like there are aspects of stability in everyone. There are aspects of like anxious or avoidant in everyone, right? But if you're getting in fight cycles, the most common fight cycle that we see is between anxious and avoidant couples.
Okay. Why?
Usually, why? Because the tendency of the avoidant is to avoid conflict at all costs, to avoid connection at all costs, to avoid vulnerability at all costs. And the tendency of the anxious is to chase after the avoidant because they need deep connection. They need to be seen. They need affection. So, like, we have one person who really desires depth and connection and addressing something in this moment, and the other person who wants to be by themselves and isolate and think about things and don't talk to me, don't touch me. So this person doesn't want the attention from this person, but this person needs it in order to feel okay. Both of them feel very anxious when the other person is kind of around, and so they're
Ooh.
getting these fight cycles. Yeah, it's interesting because they fall in love with each other because they kind of fill in each other's gaps. The avoidant really admires the vulnerability of the anxious person. The anxious person really admires the independence of the avoidant and the boundaries that they have. But like all things, when we get into relationship with someone, it's a mirror back to us, our own capabilities or disabilities,
Shoot.
right?
Yeah, because that was my question. Because if it's the most common source of tension, my next question was, well, is that because you fall into those? I don't want to say roles, but you kind of fall into those roles, or is it because you're attracted to at first because of the opposite part of it? It's the latter, yeah.
I mean, it's both. I mean, you can't be attracted to the opposite if you're not playing out that role. If neither one of you is aware that you have these tendencies, of course you're going to, you're going to attract the perfect fit. You're not going to attract what you are. People always say you attract what you are, and you attract the perfect fit for what you are.
Yeah.
So of course the avoidant would attract the anxious because they're complete opposites to where they fit each other's roles so well.
Yeah. What were the other two, Elise? I'm sorry, because we talked about those.
Secure and then anxious avoidant combo. Only about 5% of people are that one. And I forgot what the percentages of secure people, but secure people don't really encounter problems like these. A lot of people might grow up and say, yeah, my parents didn't really fight and they really worked things out. And then they grow up to have healthy marriages and stuff. Like they usually have long lineages of parents who get married, stay together for a long time. And they subconsciously know how to work through things. They subconsciously know how to find a secure partner. Like they attract each other. So they don't really get in fight cycles like that. Fight cycles happen when we don't know how to state our needs, when we don't know how to set boundaries, when we're constantly people pleasing, when we don't know how to ask for what we want. And then we attract someone who's the perfect enabler to our limitations.
Enabler to our limitations. Wow. Say more about that real quick if you could.
Well, I mean, if you attract someone who's kind of the opposite of you and you have an anxious or avoidant attachment style, right? They're not secure. So whatever they're attracted to about you is probably one of your weaknesses. Like an avoidant person might be really attracted to the anxious person's ability to people please because they're always doing things for them. But eventually, the anxious person's going to be like, dude, I'm so sick of this. I'm so sick of people pleasing. And then the avoidant person's going to be like, they're changed. They're different now. They're not doing things for me like they were before. They fell in love with the weakness that you had, not the fact that it was a strength of yours. Because if it was a strength of yours, you would be able to decipher when you wanted to do something and when you didn't want to do something. But a people pleaser does everything despite whether they want to or not.
And can I assume that when you're working with your clients on this, maybe they've gotten to that point where both sides have tired of the weaknesses, and now it's like, well, what do we do? Because I love this person, but how do I make this work? Is that kind of where you find yourself doing that work with your clients? And this is a strictly curious question, kind of pulling back the curtains a little bit, but like you're interacting with one half of that partnership most times, right? So does that get complicated to kind of help them have the conversations that they need to have in their own personal life so that they can find that harmony? Like, what does that look like?
Right. I mean, all I can do is help them understand their wants, needs, desires, how to set boundaries, how to be a healthy partner. But usually, when I have just one person coming to me, it's only one half of the party that wants to be in a growth period. Usually, only one half of the party wants to participate. They've already asked to go to couples counseling, the other party says no. And so at that point, it's kind of like this person has reached a level of consciousness where they're starting to become very aware of their weaknesses and limitations, but the other party doesn't want to participate. And all I can do in that moment is help them practice the skill sets that they need in order to be healthy, and either allow them to have understanding as their other person may or may not want to join that journey with them, or as they're on their way out with a separation.
Yeah. And I can even tell in just this short interaction with you, short-ish interaction, that even starting to question some of my childhood and my views and those inner things independently, over time I can see that type of thought process influencing in a positive way how I'm interpreting my interactions with my spouse or my kids or what have you. So it probably all comes together full circle. When it comes to relationships again, right? These communication styles. Is that what they're technically called? At least communication styles. How did you word that so people can look it up on their own? The avoidant, anxious,
Those are attachment styles.
attached themselves, and there are four. Yeah. Is it accurate if I say that it's not a process to move from one to the other? Maybe, and this is just me being a visual person, but you could picture like a circle with like, I don't know, almost like tie dye in different colors. You want to have as much as that stable color in there as possible, but you'll always have some of those other kind of tendencies. Is that a good way to look at it?
I mean, I think it's a logical way to look at it, but I don't like to tell people that. I like to tell them that you want to be mostly secure, right? Like, because or else I think people will try to hold on to their attachments as like, oh, I'm an avoidant attachment style, so that's why I do this, or I'm an anxious attachment style, that's why I do this. We don't want to identify with our weaknesses. We want to say, I have experienced attachment issues and I'm working on being secure. So we don't want to just give space to, because or else we'll start using that as excuses and the excuses will expand. So, yes, but my encouragement is no. I'm a
All right.
hard coach.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. All right. So coming full circle, and last question for you. So if someone is listening and recognizing that they have some work to do for the better, right? Like just in a positive way, saying like, you know what, maybe there's some things unaddressed. Maybe there's some subconscious trauma, subconscious anything. A couple practical steps. What should they do?
Well, I always tell my clients in the first session to just wake up in the first 10, 15 minutes of your day. If you can, try to get up 10 minutes before everybody else wakes up and just bring presence and awareness to your body. So I also say, you can do journaling. You can go for a walk without listening to music. You can do a breathwork exercise or yoga, whatever gets your body into a state of calm. Then you're lowering your stress level and your nervous system to to a base level of safety throughout the day. So you're not going to overreact during the day. You're not going to let overwhelm pile onto overwhelm. And any anxiety that you wake up with, you're immediately addressing. So you're telling your body that I am a priority, not that everybody else comes first every day.
Got it. Back to the importance of the physical connection between the body and the emotions and the mind. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's good. What else?
Well, then, just like anything else, I would say find a community. You're going to want to find like an outside third party who can help you work through deep things, but you also want to find a positive community and environment that's going to be your sticks and rods when you start sliding backwards. So, like, we are the sum of the five people we surround ourselves by. So, if you got some friends who are stuck in old business, they're going to pull you back into old business. You have to find an online community or an in-person community that is looking forward to growing, looking forward to doing the things that you want to do, so that you can constantly surround yourself with the new habits that help you shovel a different neural pathway.
Got it. Love it. So find a community, find a tribe, if you will, and be intentional who you surround yourself with. Great
Right.
advice. Great advice. Elise, this has been amazing. I know we're up on time. Truly a blessing for me personally, just in this session. I feel like I've got some work to do outside of this, but couldn't be more grateful for you being here and joining the show. So thank you, Elise. We appreciate it. Where can folks find you, support you, and learn more about you?
Anybody can find me on any of the social medias, and Any man who needs a support system, like I don't care who it is, find someone, find something. But obviously, the Better Man membership is always open to you, and our community is going to welcome you with open arms.
Love it. The powerful Elise Micheals. Thank you so much.